Hi boys and girls. So I hope you were able to listen to the first chapter of our new story, The Witches, yesterday. And the first chapter was a note on witches, and basically it was just talking about how any woman could be a witch, basically. The author of Roald Dahl was telling us about how witches have to be women, even though ghouls and goblins are men. Witches are women, and that they could look like anything, like nice people. They could even be your teachers. So we're going to move on to the next chapter. It's called My Grandmother. My grandmother. I myself had 2 separate encounters with witches before I was 8 years old. From the first, I escaped unharmed, but on the second occasion, I was not so lucky. Things happened to me that will probably make you scream when you read about them. That can't be helped. The truth must be told. The fact that I am still here and able to speak to you, however peculiar I may look, is due entirely to my wonderful grandmother. My grandmother was Norwegian. The Norwegians know all about witches, for Norway, with its black forests and icy mountains, is where the first witches came from. My father and my mother were also Norwegian, but because my father had a business in England, I had been born there and had lived there and started going to an English school. Twice a year, at Christmas and in the summer, we went back to Norway to visit my grandmother. This old lady, as far as I could gather, was just about the only surviving relative we had on either side of our family. She was my mother's mother, and I absolutely adored her. When she and I were together, we spoke either in Norwegian or in English. It didn't matter which. We were equally fluent in both languages. I have to admit that I felt closer to her than even to my mother. Soon after my 7th birthday, my parents took me as usual to spend Christmas with my grandmother in Norway. And it was over there, while my father and mother and I were driving in icy weather just north of Oslo, that our car skidded off the road and went tumbling down into the rocky ravine. My parents were killed, and I was firmly strapped into the back seat, and I received only a cut on the forehead. I won't go into the horrors of that terrible afternoon. I still get shivers when I think about it. I finished up, of course, back at my grandmother's house with her arms tight around me and both of us crying the whole night long. Very, very sad. Also the start to a lot of Disney movies, right guys? What are we going to do now? I asked her through the tears. You will stay here with me, she said, and I will look after you. Aren't I going back to England? No, she said, I could never do that. Heaven shall take my soul, but Norway shall keep my bones. The very next day, in order that we might both try to forget our great sadness, my grandmother started telling me stories. She was a wonderful storyteller, and I was enthralled by everything she told me. But I didn't become really excited until she got onto the subject of witches. She was apparently a great expert on these creatures, and she made it very clear to me that her witch stories, unlike most of the others, were not imaginary tales. They were all true. They were the gospel truth. They were history. Everything she was telling me about witches had actually happened, and I had better believe it. What was far, far worse, was that witches were still with us. They were all around us, and I had better believe that too. Are you really being truthful, Grandmama? Really and truly truthful? My darling, she said, you won't last long in this world if you don't know how to spot a witch when you see one. But you told me that witches look like ordinary women, Grandmama. So how can I spot them? You must listen to me, my grandmother said. You must remember everything I tell you. After that, all you can do is crush your heart and pray to heaven and hope for the best. We were in the big living room of her house in Oslo, and I was ready for bed. The curtains were never drawn in that house, and through the windows I could see huge snowflakes falling slowly to an outside world that was as black as tar. My grandmother was tremendously old and wrinkled, with a massive wide body which was smothered in gray lace. She sat there majestic in her armchair, filling every inch of it. Not even a mouse could have squeezed in to sit beside her. I myself, just 7 years old, was crouched on the floor at her feet wearing pajamas, dressing gown, and slippers. You swear you aren't pulling my leg, I kept saying to her. You swear you aren't just pretending? Listen, she said, I have known no less than 5 children who have simply vanished off the face of this earth, never to be seen again. The witches took them. I still think you're just trying to frighten me, I said. I am trying to make sure you don't go down the same way, she said. I love you and I want you to stay with me. Tell me about the children who disappeared, I said. My grandmother was the only grandmother I ever met who smoked cigars. She lit one now, a long black cigar that smelt of burning rubber. That first child I knew who disappeared, she said, was called Ragnhild Hansen. Ragnhild was about 8 at the time, and she was playing with her little sister on the lawn. Their mother, who was baking bread in the kitchen, came outside for a breath of fresh air. Where's Ragnhild? She asked. She went away with the tall lady, the little sister said. What tall lady? The mother said. The tall lady in white gloves, the sister said. She took Ragnhild by the hand and led her away. No one, my grandmother said, ever saw Ragnhild again. Didn't they search for her? I asked. Oh, they searched for miles around. Everyone in the town helped, but they never found her. What happened to the other 4 children? I asked. They vanished just as Ragnhild did. How, Grandmama? How did they vanish? In every case, a strange lady was seen outside the house just before it happened. But how did they vanish? I asked. The second one was very peculiar, my grandmother said. There was a family called Christensen. They lived up on Holmenkollen, and they had an oil painting in the living room, which they were very proud of. The painting showed some ducks in the yard outside a farmhouse. There were no people in the painting, just a flock of ducks on a grassy farmyard, and the farmhouse in the background. All right, this chapter is very long. I think we'll stop here for today. Right before, and when we start again tomorrow, I'll start with the second child, the second story that she's about to read, just so that these videos aren't too long for you. All right, so we have the first disappearance of a child from the witches, we think. All right, so tomorrow we'll go on to the second story. All right, guys, have a nice day. See you later.